This program was made possible by a grant from S.R. Foxley, Bob Generic, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you wish to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below. So here we are, back to dumb things people say to atheists. Fun, huh? Before we get started, I want to take just a moment to plug my website, prophetofzod.com. It's been there for as long as I've had this channel, but I've only recently started updating it with relevant information, including an organized library of my old videos for easy browsing, and a store where you can buy POZ stuff. Both of these are pretty incomplete and in the early stages of development, unless you're watching this later, but feel free to check them out if you want. It also has links to my social media and this channel, but you're already here, so, you know. But that all out of the way, you know how Christians sometimes like to tell us how sinful we are, how irrational we are, how misguided we are, and so on, right? Well, sometimes they just want a good old-fashioned tell us to shut up. And that's when they might say something like, okay, if you don't want to believe in God, that's fine, but why can't you keep it to yourself? Yeah, because keeping it to yourself is what Christians just absolutely specialize in. Am I right? So as I started hinting, we can't even begin to do this topic justice without addressing how absurdly hypocritical it is for Christians to say this. A huge part of Christians' identity is based on sharing the gospel with others and being loud and proud about who they are and what they believe. From the earliest stages of childhood, they're taught by songs not to hide their light, but to let it brightly shine. The phrase, "I am not ashamed of the gospel," is one of the Bible quotes that's worked its way most firmly into today's popular Christian culture. And modern evangelicals are all too happy to threaten potentially silent Christians with the biblical idea that if they're ashamed of Christ in front of others, he'll be ashamed of them in front of his Father. And if that all weren't enough, Jesus' last act on earth is to codify proselytizing as the main mission of Christianity. So while the New Testament never explicitly endorses conversion by the sword, it certainly instructs its followers to run around beating everybody over the head with words. And of course, Christians have happily risen to the task with missions, billboards, bumper stickers, door-to-door evangelism, endless Facebook posts, invitations to church, state-funded displays on public property, and pretty much every other method of bringing their religion into both the public sphere and your face. So it's more than a little weird, and looks like the most brazen act of hypocrisy, when Christians suggest that atheists just keep it to themselves. So why does it happen? Why can some people spend all day drowning in a newsfeed full of praise the Lords, Bible verses, answers to prayer, stories about what a church is up to, or even apologetics and talk about people who deny God in their hearts, and think it's all just the most natural and socially acceptable thing in the world, yet suddenly feel something deeply offensive has happened the moment an atheist posts even the most mild and diplomatic suggestion about their values or point of view? Why can't a single atheist billboard go up without stoking major, often nationwide controversy? And why do people seem confused and or angry about the fact that I, for example, have a YouTube channel devoted to discussing my atheist perspective on fundamentalist Christianity? The most obvious answer, and the one it might be tempting for us to focus on, is that Christians really are just brazen hypocrites on this issue. That they're outspoken, public policy-pushing bullies who want to see open license given for the expression and possible enforcement of their ideas, while stamping out the slightest expression of any contrary or even different point of view. And there might be something to this, for some Christians. Among the most vocal evangelical Christian activists, there are those who hold a flagrant double standard on the right to public expression, hidden only behind the thinnest justifications about this being a Christian nation or the need for fundamental shared values or whatever. So let's acknowledge that these types are out there, that they have a dominionist attitude at least similar to that of Islamic theocrats, and they have no inclination toward public fairness and will generally be adversarial toward us no matter how we approach them. Now it is worth remembering that there is a lot of variation even within this group. as it can possibly encompass everything from professional manipulative blowhards to super fired up and politically active laypeople, all the way down to reasonably laid back and good-natured Christians who without much thought hold to a passive sense that abortion should be illegal and there should be prayer in schools and stuff like that. So while we need to acknowledge the hard-lined aggressive stance that's out there, let's remember not to paint any group with too broad a brush. But even setting aside the fundamentalist dominionist reactionaries, there still is a general sense, within circles of laid-back Christians and even the barely religious or non-religious general public, that outspoken atheism is kind of mean or unnecessary. I, for example, have heard many decent, fairly progressive-minded people asking why I would devote a YouTube channel to atheism, often with questions like, why can't you just let people have their religion? So why is this? Why would these types of people, who we might think would jump to our side against pushy fundamentalists, take issue with outspoken atheism? This is an important question, and exploring it, honestly and without getting defensive, can help us recognize a few misunderstandings so we can better communicate with people. One of the first things we need to do is recognize that, as atheists, we're so weirdly immersed in exploring the darker sides of religion, along with its negative consequences, that we forget most people don't see it the way we do. One of the ironies of the atheist community is that our ranks are disproportionately filled with former Christians who were once very involved in the religion, probably because those who get too good a look at its inner workings come to understand how inconsistent and potentially dangerous it is. And once we become atheists, we tend to congregate with others who share and reinforce our understanding of religion. However, there's a second irony at work here, one we really need to understand, and that is that people who only have a casual, fleeting understanding of Christianity are often going to side with it against us, because just as we've seen its ugly insides, the public is better acquainted with its pretty facade. Now, of course, people's opinions about religion vary, but there's definitely a general respect for Christianity in our society. It's seen as a steadfast source of morality, of community and tradition. There's an old-fashioned but deep-rooted sense that good, clean, decent, family-oriented people go to church, while it's the drinkers, gamblers, carousers, and general ne'er-do-wells who don't. And while this perception is outdated and fading, some of its traces linger, such that many people still consider church attendance at least an indication of better character. And even those who don't attend often think that going more is one of those things like improved diet and exercise that would probably do them good. And then there's the general warm and fuzzy feel some people associate with religion. It just feels wholesome, and it carries all kinds of imagery and connotations. Of grandma's traditions, of a sweet child praying by his bedside, of old hymns, sweet Sunday school images of Jesus. Imagine all the impressions of Christianity you can capture in a Norman Rockwell painting, along with the ways it can get entwined with general nostalgia, and you get the idea. Complicating things further, Christianity is at least one vehicle for a lot of the vague sentiments shared by most people, including the highly populated and poorly defined spiritual but not religious, including the feeling that your loved ones are still with you or looking out for you in some way after you've died, or the general sense of wonder and connectedness, or the feeling that there's something bigger out there. And when you say you're an atheist, it's easy to sound like you're a cold-hearted who's stomping all over everybody's most meaningful but misunderstood feelings. So while a lot of the public knows there are dark sides to religion, or at least people who abuse it, there's a strong sense that atheism is kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, aggressively and thoughtlessly attacking all the mild, loving traditions people hold dear, along with the abuses. In short, the gap in understanding between "I'm personally not all that religious," which covers a huge portion of the general public, and "I don't believe in the supernatural and am opposed to religion," is far bigger than most of us recognize. Thus, we atheists often find ourselves fighting an uphill battle in conversation. Our stance by its very nature is defined by what it's against, which seems a bit douchey from the start, and it's natural for people to wonder why you're against something that's innocent, generally causes people to do good, and is a deeply personal and private part of people's lives. And to most people, honestly, the answer seems to be for no reason other than we're smartasses trying to prove how right and smart we are. In light of this understanding, doesn't it seem a little natural for people to wonder why we can't just keep our contrarian stances to ourselves? If people are going around doing good and not harming anybody, why not just leave them to it? The problem, as we're all too aware, and I can already hear you protesting, is that religion doesn't just do good, and it often is harmful. Even setting aside outlying extremist behavior, the list of reasons is long. Religion teaches people to define morality according to blind dictates, leading them to accept wild guesses about how they should act instead of carefully considering the consequences of their actions. And in fact, it does the same for every question about anything, not only setting back society's broader scientific endeavors, but making people's personal understanding on a lot of things shallower, encouraging mental shortcuts and easy but wrong answers to things we should seriously ponder and explore. Along with this, it encourages people to see others as different and even worse for totally irrelevant reasons. The Christian idea of sin and salvation distracts people from overcoming bad habits and keeps them in cycles of destructive behavior by exaggerating the severity of every bad deed and telling people that uttering an incantation instantly reverses the course of their lives when it's really fixed nothing at all. By teaching them to rationalize Old Testament atrocities, it dulls their sense of empathy, training them to dehumanize those they are distant from and see as different. And don't even get me started on the deep, utterly needless worry and irrational behavior that result from putting the possibility of hell in people's, especially children's, minds. And of course, as we've said before, Christianity is not just a private practice for many people, but is used to introduce public pressure, often in the form of policy changes, to coerce others into honoring their rituals and conforming to their ideals. But here's the thing. You don't need me to carry on about this, because you have your own understanding of what's wrong with religion, a unique understanding all your own based largely on your personal history with it. So I would encourage you to reflect on the reasons not only for your lack of belief in God, but for why you think it's worth pursuing. Think not only what you're against, but what values you stand for, and how religion can be a threat to them. Then try to maintain a sense of how the public views us, and be prepared to give a meaningful and socially appropriate articulation of what you know of fundamentalist religion and why you oppose it. Why can't you keep it to yourselves is definitely a dumb thing people say to atheists, but there's a legitimate misunderstanding behind why a lot of people say it. Remember, it doesn't take a dumb person to say a dumb thing. Thus, when someone asks why you can't just keep your atheism to yourself, you can politely and calmly 1. Ask why this is expected of atheists but not the religious. 2. Explain that you're not against people's right to private practices or belief, but that 3. You do see harm in religious belief, and be prepared to explain why. And finally, try to convey what you're for, in other words, what you really value as a human, and that you oppose religion not because you're a contrarian, but because religion threatens many of these values. I know it's a hard journey, and many people will not understand why you do what you do. But it's worth the effort of slowly helping people understand the heart of why you really are an outspoken atheist.